All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the January 23rd Comox Valley Regional District Board meeting. Just want to call the meeting to order and begin by acknowledging that we're meeting here today on the unceded traditional territories of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. And as always, we read one of the calls to action, number 40, justice. We call on all levels of government in collaboration with the Aboriginal people to create adequately funded and accessible Aboriginal specific victim programs and services with appropriate evaluation mechanisms. And first item will just be adoption of the minutes. Moved, seconded. Anyone opposed? That passes. And next is delegation follow-up. And this is a follow-up from a delegation by the Comox Valley Cycling Coalition. This is a verbal update by staff. So I'll pass that to our CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, as is our practice, following delegations at the next meeting, staff are often able to update on the response to that delegation and provide the opportunity there for the board to consider any further action that might be needed. In this case, there's actually a staff report later on this agenda about the Island Rail Corridor. And Jake Martins will be introducing that staff report, and we'll touch on some of the work that is proposed in that work plan. And we feel that that presentation would actually probably cover off this delegation follow-up. And if there is any further action or interest the board has, then that would be an appropriate time to bring that up. So yeah, I would suggest that any further discussion maybe happen under that staff report later on the agenda.
Great, thanks, Yeo. And so then we'll just move on to item 2, the Code of Conduct Policy Amendment. And that's it. Thank you. Moved and seconded. And staff, do you want to comment?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Only insofar as to say that this Code of Conduct Policy was presented to the CVRD board at a previous meeting. It has since then been received and considered at the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board, which is a partner board to this organization. And there was no further changes coming from that Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board. And so it is here then for approval by this board.
Okay, so that's on the table. So anyone opposed? Seeing none, that passes unanimously. And we're going to move now on to delegations. And we have a delegation today from the Beaufort Watershed Stewards. And we have Dave Weaver, president of the Beaufort Watershed Stewards, to present the findings of the Sauble River Watershed Cumulative Effects Assessment Project, which was completed in 2023, which was completed with funding from the CVRD. So I'll ask Dave if you want to head up to the podium. I don't see an indication of a motion, but yeah, just streamlining it.
Okay, you can hear me okay? Thank you very much. And thank you, Chair. My name is Dave Weaver, and I would like to thank the CVRD board for allowing us to present today. I'm Dave Weaver, retired professional forester with the Beaufort Watershed Stewards. And today we're going to be presenting the Sauble River Watershed Cumulative Effects Project that we completed in 2023. I'd like to thank the CVRD for assistance in funding this project. And you can see in the bottom left-hand side, I'd like to acknowledge, we respectively acknowledge the watersheds that we depend on the unceded territory of the Comox, Petlatch, and Qualicum First Nations, traditional keepers of our land. I sent out a bit of a brochure on the Beaufort Watershed Stewards. You're probably familiar with us, and they've seemed to have populated most of the room here today too. So there's no water sampling going on today. Well, there did this morning. It's a grassroots run non-for-profit since about 2017. We're concerned about water quality and quantity, and we're a proactive rather than a reactive group. And so you can see the photograph there. That's looking from Denman Island over at the Beaufort Watersheds, and that's our area. What I'm basically going to do today is address this main question. Is this too much or is it okay? Our watersheds are extensively developed, as it shows on this snip from from Google Earth, but the methodology that we use to assess the health of the watershed is a cumulative effects one, and we'll be able to quantify that for you rather than just looking at an image. I got the takeaways right at the very beginning here, so you'll make sure that this is right up front. And basically, watersheds within the Comox Valley Regional District continue to have potential hydrological risks. What we found in the Sable is what we basically found in a few watersheds in 2021, which was our first watershed health assessment. And we really need local governments to advocate for forestry legislative change. I really don't think, and I hear it quite often, that no change really comes until we get some legislative change. That's the Sable River flowing at peak flow in the fall season. So for me, this document came available in 2022, and it's a government-produced protocol of assessment of aquatic ecosystem health, and it's really the holy grail for me. It was the absolute gift for small-scale watershed grassroots operations, because it now has a comprehensive BC protocol to assess the health of watersheds. It has 6 core indicators or metrics of watershed health that I'll show you, that has scientifically supported thresholds of what is okay and what is not okay, and it gives a rating for whatever can give you a rating for what the negative impacts would be due to development within the watershed. It's based on a GIS, a Geographic Information Systems assessment, at a coarser scale, at the provincial scale, but it also is set up that locals can use it for their watersheds. So it's somewhat user-friendly. There's a couple of pieces that are a little clunky, but I tried to address that in my report. What really encouraged me, as well as BWS, was a report by the Forest Practices Board. And I hope that most of the members have heard of this group. This is the at-length internal watchdog for forest practices in the province. They released this report in January 2022, 2 years ago, after 15 years of looking at up to 27 complaints about forest practices and water, and published about 8 special investigations. They came up with 3 fairly compelling issues, and these are quotes on your slide. There are no legal requirements to assess or consider cumulative effects of forest practices in most watersheds in British Columbia. Current forest practices contribute sediment to streams, and historic forest practices continue to negatively affect water. So those were compelling statements, and took them quite a while to produce this report. This is the area that I'm talking about. There's the Sable River. This is an oblique Google Earth image from, if you're in a helicopter above Denman Island, you can see Buckley Bay in the foreground, and it's a fairly large watershed. It's one of the largest ones I've assessed yet within the Beaufort, 10,000 hectares. Goes from the sea to the mountaintop, and it's equivalent to, just to give you the context, Hornby and Denman Island. The net area is about 8,000 hectares, and it's about 100 hectares less than that area. So can you relate to the size of the area involved? So here we go, right to the results. We looked at these 6 metrics, and you can see across the top, they're named, and then there's a snip from the GIS maps that we produced at the same reference point of Felker Lake up in the Beaufort watersheds. So we looked at road density within 100 meters of a stream, road density on unstable slopes, stream crossings density, subject to the roads, riparian disturbance, if the vegetation around streams has been disturbed or not. Thanks, I just moved that icon above. And the last one is peak flow. It actually has about 9 submetrics. That's the most complicated metric, but it includes that acronym that I hope everyone remembers from 2 years ago if we were here, but ECA, equivalent clear-cut area. So it's actually a fraction of the whole rating, but these 6 metrics are indications of development within a watershed that have a significant, or could have a significant impact on the health of the watershed. Now, these are the results. You can see out of the 6 that I assessed, 4 of them are above the threshold. That threshold line is that orange line along the bottom. And just to give you an example, road density we found was 3.7 kilometers per square kilometer. That's how you measure that metric. And it's well over the high threshold of 2.1. So there's extreme amount of development going on in the Sable River. 2 metrics were below the line, were below the low, and that was road density on unstable slopes and riparian disturbance. Those ones were low. Just to give you context, we found 306 kilometers of roads. It's basically the equivalent of driving 16 times from the north end of Denman Island to the south. And that's what it would look like. That's basically driving from Fanny Bay to Victoria and back up to Ladysmith. I did move, if Daniel or Burr notices, I moved Hornby Island over a little bit to make it a bit closer to. So, yeah, and we'll hear about that. And you'll probably get the submission for the bridge pretty quick. The equivalent clear cut area, again, ECA plays a minor role in this protocol, but it's equivalent to all of Denman Island being in a clear cut equivalent state. It's not necessarily straight clear cut, but clear cut equivalent state hydrologically, just minus Boyle Point Provincial Park. So 58% is well above concern level again. So how it's calculated is they look at these 3 components of watershed function, basically, or components of watershed health: water quality, water quantity, and ecosystem function. And within all of those metrics, we ended up with a very high risk in water quality and water quantity, and they generate an overall health risk value. So basically, using the protocol, all the procedures in the protocol, you end up with a high potential to negatively impact the natural state of the hydrological processes. Now, these are quotes right out of the protocol from the government publication. And what they suggested that you have to adjust development activities. Otherwise, you have a high potential of compromising hydrological processes. So here are my recommendations. And I've got a couple more minutes, I think. 1 more minute? Oh, okay, okay, I'll talk fast. Encourage other community watersheds groups to use this protocol. I tried to set that up so that it would be a usable template. We will definitely continue to assess other watersheds using this protocol. And we're advocating for reform of the BC Private Managed Forest Land Act to restrict rate of harvest, because that was removed in 2003. And the Watershed with Sustainability Act has regulations that allow for a water sustainability plan and planning over private land. I'll leave you with this last image. And this is just a segue into understanding the significance of things. This is private managed forest land. I just have a graphic here showing basically what's new and what has unchanged. What's basically unchanged is that, yes, they plant trees. They legally have to plant trees, and they've been doing it for a long period of time. And I have 2 seconds. And the water licenses are regulated quite strongly within the Managed Forest Land Act. And managed private forest landowners are doing a lot, and they're doing wonderful things for the whole community's funding, access, salmon enhancement, marmots, and they're funding a lot of local volunteer groups. And this is all great, and it's turning money back into the community. But the problem is this is not changed. That area is still being harvested at an extreme level. And really, we have to have these tough conversations with everyone involved, especially with legislation and with the landowners that can address this. Thanks so much. I'm willing to take some questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dave. And I see that Director Arbor already has one. I just want to thank you for the creative illustrations and comparisons. I think you got about 12 minutes, which is roughly half the time it takes to take the ferry from Hornby to Denman, or perhaps to drive straight across Denman Island. But anyway, thank you for that. You packed a lot into that 12 minutes, and I'll go online to Director Arbor first, and then we'll go to questions in the room.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Dave, for your presentation, and to the Beaufort Watershed Stewards for the ongoing great work that you're doing to just provide baseline data, something that we haven't been able to see a lot around the private forest lands over the decades. So it's and I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I'm actually attending in Vancouver the Salish Sea Symposium, which deals with ocean protection issues, and I'll be a speaker tomorrow. But definitely part of my talk will be the risks around forest management in on the east side of Vancouver Island. If we can go back to the slide around the recommendations, I think I very much like this. In fact, this morning I did see your BWS car and sign at the Trent River, so I was like, oh, maybe Dave is starting to work on the next project, but likely not. I guess that was for just water monitoring. But yes, encourage other community watershed groups to use this protocol. Across the island, I talked with other elected officials in the Cowichan district, in the Nanaimo district, CRD. And I think that the work that you're doing at BWS is really useful. So thank you for that. And I'm glad you're going to continue this work, hopefully moving north until we have a baseline for the entire Comox Valley. I know that's putting a lot on your shoulder as a volunteer, but I really think it's excellent work. The reason why I asked for this slide to come back is the third one. I'm actually giving up. I think I'm done advocating for reform of the BC Private Managed Forest Land Act. They started a review in 2018, and we're in 2024, and absolutely nothing has happened. The government is sitting on its hands. In the meantime, the government announced old growth deferrals, and the private forest lands in Mosaic and others were exempt from that old growth deferral. Treaty, we're looking at treaty. Oh, private forest lands are exempt from having treaty lands repatriated. So, and then we're hearing about somewhat dubious carbon schemes around trying to protect the forest for 25 years and make money from that. So what I'm thinking now, and maybe that's further conversation we can have with BWS, is I'm thinking of starting to work on a resolution to ask the government to scratch the PMFLA altogether, and to give the legislative authority to regional districts to look after the zoning of these lands. And I think what we could do is we could immediately bring the zoning at least to par with what the province agrees is acceptable on Crown lands. So I don't think we would need to be too ambitious, just to bring the bottom up from what has been a cut and run to something that's actually now the baseline in the province around Crown lands. So I'm thinking of starting to work on that because the government is not answering us. It's been 6 years since they started the review. Nothing's happened. And the rate of cut, as you well exemplified, continues at the same pace. So I'll leave it at that. Is the only recommendation. I'd love to have more conversations with this year, and I'm happy to talk to Mosaic as well about it and other private forest lands. But in the meantime, I'm really thankful for this excellent work that you've presented today. And feel free to comment on anything I mentioned.
Where's this? Oh, I'm red. Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Yes, that's a great comment that you make. And really, I made the same recommendation 2 years ago and nothing has happened. And I know the lobby is difficult. The focus on the province, since the majority of managed forest lands in the province, 95% is public. I don't like using the word crown, but is public, where the other 5% is private. And it's mostly the east side of Vancouver Island. There's a little chunk of private, or a large chunk of private managed forest land in the Kootenays. But again, to really address the rate of harvest, that would have to be brought back into legislation. There is most of the private managed forest lands that are under the Act have their taxes reduced to basically farm taxes, because at 800,000 hectares, there's no way they could pay taxes on that for residential taxes. So they do pay millions and millions of dollars in taxes. There's no doubt about that. But they do make a lot of money if they log at the rate that they're logging at too, which is, you know, that's the business they're in. You have to respect that. But maybe that's a great angle. I'm personally willing to talk to assist anybody at the regional district to go and talk to folks who are responsible for what's going on, be it government or be it the actual licensees. I think we're at the point where we can't necessarily advocate more than to elevate the situation. So I'll just throw that out.
All right, thanks, Dave. And we'll go in the room to Director Brown.
Thanks. Thanks so much for the presentation. So I'm from Cumberland, and our watershed is the Perseverance Creek watershed.
Right.
We have been advocating for 8 years with a resolution every year and a meeting with the Minister of Forests every year to ask for changes to the Private Managed Forest Lands Act. So I am aligned with Director Arbor's grief around that and just basically giving up on that reform. My question is, are there drinking water licenses in the Sable River watershed? And if so, who are they with? None.
No, there's no registered drinking water licenses within the Sable, you know. It does definitely change the game, as I tried to highlight. You know, obviously Langley Lake has if you read the Private Managed Forest Land Act, don't read it before you go to bed or you'll fall asleep halfway through it. There's no two ways about it. But if you read through there's quite a definitive section on licensed water intake, and it does up the bar there, definitely. You can see the rate of harvest around Langley Lake, the way that they smaller clear cuts, the amount of rate, actually the ECA I calculated for Langley Lake, it's around 18-20%. So it's quite a bit lower than, say, the Sable, where there's no license. You know, if you look at the tenure on the east side of the island, the Nanaimo Lakes, I believe Cowichan Lake, they all have licensed water intakes, and that bar comes up a little bit. And it comes up to the bar that's more appropriate at the scale, at the landscape scale. And rather than what's in behind the elephant here, that's definitely not. But, you know, my question to you in Cumberland, and I've been dying to ask that question, is the water intake at Allen Lake and all of those ones, are they registered licensed water intakes? Now, I know they're on private land owned by Cumberland, so maybe that circumvents what's on the Private Managed Forest Land Act. Tough question.
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. We definitely have a water license. I'm not sure which lake it's associated with.
Yeah.
Because we have several lakes in our intake system.
Yeah.
So I meant to say in my original question, apologies, Chair, that our last advocacy with the province was to add someone to the Private Managed Forest Lands Council that
Yes.
has water background.
Right.
To sort of get that voice at the table. So
Right.
we can still try for that, although,
Yeah,
you know.
that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, great. And we have one last question, and it's Director Kerr.
Thank you, Chair. Over the Christmas holidays, I had coffee with a young forester who was home for the holidays. He works mostly in the interior. He was really lamenting the difference between the private lands and the rules around the private lands and forestry there versus the public or crown lands. I was wondering, with your analysis, has a type of analysis like you've done been done on public lands as well? Like, and is there a comparison difference in what you've seen in terms of, you know, the roads and other effects, public lands versus private lands? Thanks.
Great question. Oh my goodness, I was really ready for this one. There's an extra slide here. I was reading your mail. So these are the results from 2 years ago, where you can see at the very top of that graph, if you can, it has % private land on them. And you can see the Sable is 100% private land. Wilford Creek is 100%, and all the other ones are various breakdowns. Now you can see the metrics on the left-hand side. There's three metrics there. One is not a metric that has a threshold. That's the total area harvested. But you can see road density. Let's just look at that. The more you log, the more roads you make. The more you log, the more your equivalent clear-cut area goes up. On public land, for example, within the watersheds that I've assessed 2 years ago, they're basically defaulted taxes from when the Dunsmuir allocation happened. They defaulted on their taxes back in the 30s and 40s, and then it went back to the Crown, quote unquote. And so it's been managed by the Crown since then. The Comox First Nations are the managers of it. And you can see that the density of road on the higher public lands are much lower. And I was able to show, if you go to our website, I'll have my full report from 2021, and I broke it down by public, private, and public. Some of the equivalent clear-cut area levels are as high as 70% on the private, and you take out the public. But as a watershed as a whole, watershed doesn't care about legal boundaries. It's a function in itself. Its hydrological function is bounded. So overall, it might work out. But you can see there that, you know, the highest indices of road density in clear-cut area. The graph on the bottom, I'll highlight that one. I didn't have time to fit it in, but now I do, which is kind of nice. But the one on the bottom, you can see the turbidity level. So that's a measure of not just sediment, but also it could be organic matter. But anyway, the boil water order is at about 1 NTU, as you're probably quite familiar with at the regional district. So Mud Bay, which is an extremely small watershed, about 300 hectares, never got any higher in its turbidity. But look at the Sable is like 15. Damage to salmon habitat is usually around 5. So we're a little concerned about the functionality of those watersheds for sure. Have I gone over time, Chair?
You found the loophole where we don't time your answers, but I just want to thank Director Kerr for asking the question that prompted this slide. That correlation is quite remarkable.
It's the third time I've done one of these, so it's
It's
okay. Thanks. Any other questions?
Not seeing any further questions. Thank you so much, Dave, and everyone who's worked with you on this. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much to the regional district for supporting us. We really appreciate it, and have a good meeting.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, so we're just going to move on to reports, and we'll just start off with receipt of the ESC minutes from January 8th. We get a motion? Yes. Sorry, I should have asked the questions on that. Second, Director Hardy.
Not so much a question, but perhaps a comment. And if I recall, it may have been around this time last year that the CBRD did invite our 2 MLAs in to have a conversation about private forest managed lands and the issues and concerns that a lot of citizens have. I'm just wondering if there's an appetite to maybe invite those MLAs to come in and maybe see that similar type presentation again. Just throwing it out there, but as a follow-up to last year, like I said, I think we did have the 2 MLAs come in on our A and our MLA from Cumberland / South.
Minister Osborne. Yeah.
Minister Osborne, yeah.
Yeah. Would we need a motion for that, just procedurally?
Yeah, I think, and I would suggest there would be a motion from the board if that were what was wanted, and as is typical with delegations, we do it for those kinds of actions and follow up at the subsequent meeting. There's a space on the next agenda for that consideration, and it's not coming back to me the invite or the attendance of the MLAs, but we can certainly do that research in the meantime and come back to you with that information, what was presented.
It sounds like a resolution would be helpful. Maybe Director Hardy, if you wanted to bring that to the next meeting, that would be optimal. It's not our practice to do that unless it's an exceptional circumstance. Yeah.
But if everybody thinks it's an off the wall comment or whatever, that's fine.
I don't think that's what's being said. I think we're saying like, it sounds like a really good idea, but just requires a resolution, which we do at the next meeting. Okay, all right, Dave, your light is still on. Would you mind turning that off before you head out? Thank you. All right, so that's the minutes are on the table for receipt. So anyone opposed? Seeing none, and there is a recommendation. That's been moved and seconded. Did anyone want to speak to that? Director Grave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, when you're in the electoral areas, you're absolutely dependent on the partnership with provincial government to move a lot of issues forward. This stems basically from a report on rainwater management in the Saratoga Beach, Miracle Beach area that we commissioned from McElhaney, and was reported out in 2019. That was sent further to the province, and we haven't heard anything since. So, like a lot of these initiatives, we don't own the infrastructure, we don't own the ditches, the roadways, the culverts, the bridges, and we're absolutely dependent on some response from the province to move this forward and find a solution for rainwater management in that area. And this is only indicative of a lot of different initiatives that we try to move forward and run up against provincial indifference. I know the ministry doesn't really see themselves as part of the local community, but they have to come to realize that they really are. And I think this is good, a good resolution to bring forward. I'm not overly hopeful, much like the previous presentation here. You know, we're basically children of the province, and they basically don't recognize the fact that we are their children and we need to be worked with and in order for us to bring benefit to the community. So yeah, I just ask for support for this to bring it forward to AVICC. It's just one more step. And speaking to the if I could, if you give me the latitude to speak to the previous presentation, I can say that I've presented on the private forest land issue when I was president of AVICC, even when I was the second vice president and the first vice president. And in this case, it was doesn't seem to matter if it's social credit, Liberal, or NDP, you get the same glazed look. So there's more to this than meets the eye. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Director Grave, and thanks for bringing forward this resolution. Not seeing any other lights. We'll vote on that now. Anyone opposed? Okay, and that passes unanimously. Excellent. So next item is the Comox Valley Sewage Commission minutes from January 9th for receipt. Any questions on that? All right, anyone opposed to receipt? And that passes unanimously. Next, we have some minutes from a public, okay, the public hearing of January 16th. And those are for receipt, and the motion's on the table. So any opposed? And that passes unanimously. And now we're on to the 2024 to 2028 proposed financial plan. Okay, motion for receipt on the table, and I'll pass that over to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So tonight marks the introduction of the 2024 to 2028 financial planning process at the Comox Valley Regional District. Building on a significant change in process that was introduced to you in September of last year, I'm very pleased to say that we've now published all of the materials to support the budget deliberations over the next couple of months. Lucy will spend a bit of time on that topic tonight, and she'll be providing some opening thoughts on the financial plan itself, describing some of the overarching themes and impacts, and walking through the CVRD website and where you can find core service descriptions, individual service PowerPoints and budget pages, and documentation that describes the service levels and tax impacts. Before turning things over to Lucy, I also want to be clear that tonight is an overview. It's a big picture view of the process, supporting documentation, and what to expect in the coming weeks and months. Staff have spent tremendous effort in building the budgets themselves and then describing the services and impacts in the various documents that you'll see. What we'll be asking from you before the board, committee, and commission meetings starting on February 5th is to read these materials and be ready to have deliberations on each individual service. You'll see that the PowerPoint slides that are online contain a lot of information. Some PowerPoint files have more than 20 slides each. And during our presentations on February 5th and beyond, staff will have to move through the PowerPoint presentations fairly quickly. The content in the PowerPoints is for background and context, but staff will focus on the most meaningful aspects of each service. It may mean that we go through some parts of the PowerPoints really quickly to ensure that we can focus on the most important parts. Lastly, I appreciate this format is different than in previous years, and so might take some getting used to. What I've asked staff to do in building their budgets is to focus on levels of service and identify efficiencies while telling the story of what is most important for you as decision makers to understand. What I would ask you as directors to do is to provide meaningful feedback on each of the services when they're presented, to either support the financial plans as presented or ask for adjustments or ask for options that would enable us to carry forward your interests in delivering services. That feedback will help us return to you a recommended financial plan on March 12th that you can support and move forward with for adopting. So now over to Lucy Wichark, our Chief Financial Officer, for this PowerPoint presentation. So Lucy.
Great, thanks, Sia. And Lucy, can I just ask in advance if questions come up, or you could just take them as they come along?
We would prefer that questions are at the end.
Questions at the end. Okay, thanks for
And I
clarifying.
do have a couple of statements at the end about potentially it's not being the best place to ask in-depth questions, but I can come back to that.
Okay,
Good.
great. Thanks, Lucy.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, Chair Cole Hamilton and directors. Through the CAO to the chair, I'm pleased to be here today delivering to you the CVRD 2024 proposed financial plan. Our financial planning team is quite small, but we're quite mighty. Kelly and Jared are here today. They make up the staff in our team, and they will support this presentation today. The presentation is broken out into 8 areas. I'll take about 20 minutes of your time and we'll provide to you key considerations of this year's proposed financial plan, including the estimated income impact to Comox Valley households. We are pleased to be able to enhance public participation methods, and I will describe those to you later on in the presentation, plus bring in some clarity on next steps. As directors are aware, the financial planning cycle is an ongoing process spanning across most of the year. The cycle starts with the board's strategic direction early in the year, and then sees staff working through the months of June through December, developing the next year's budget. For local government, the financial planning system involves significant time and effort. Efficiency improvements help free up valuable time, enabling departments and directors to manage other pressing priorities. Continuous improvement to budget decision-making information seems more essential than ever, considering our current times, sharply rising costs, complex community needs, and the fact that little room exists in most household budgets. Weighing priorities between services and making difficult choices between many community needs is becoming more and more prevalent. Prior to moving forward with this cycle, staff conducted a debrief of the last and determined opportunities for improvement. Staff presented those proposed changes and the board endorsed them in September. And as one of those largest goals, staff across the CVRD worked towards completing that budget package to be ready for today. We are really pleased we were able to meet this goal. This completed package gives approximately 2 weeks period for directors to review before we get into our budget deliberation meeting days. The board's endorsed strategic plan gives direction to staff for advancing on opportunities, protecting the environment, planning for sustainable growth, and improving service delivery. Each of the initiatives found in the plan aligned with CVRD drivers. Each core service area has incorporated actions within the 2024 to 2028 work plans and budget. As overviews and individual services are presented, how financial resources are proposed to accomplish the desires of the board will become clear. Energy and emissions work is important to the CVRD, and this is an area where, once again, focus will come within the material and the presentation. As the board considers priorities and implications to taxpayer, a reminder of the large number of initiatives set out in the board's strategy and the large number well underway. At the December meeting, the strategic initiative update was provided. A link is here on this slide, giving quick access if directors want to review the latest update along with other material in the budget package. The environment in which we live continues to be volatile. Climate and social issues continue to be a focus, and households are struggling to keep up with the cost of food and housing. As you will see within this budget and not uncommon across local government and business, the cost of labor is seeing steep increases as workers look to addressing higher cost of living. As the CVRD is in the midst of major projects, the board is aware firsthand of existing challenges of capital project costs. While some material and supplies have stabilized, others continue to see shortages and labor costs continue to be high. The 2024 proposed financial plan for operations is almost $98.7 million. This is an increase of 7.3% or $6.7 million. In this graph, we can see the pressures on personnel costs, which has changed by $2.3 million, and the pressures on operating costs, which has changed by $5.6 million. The 2024 proposed financial plan for capital is almost $75 million, where in the prior year it was almost $82 million. However, the 2024 number will increase as the 2023 in-progress capital project carry-forwards are incorporated into the 2024 capital plan with a recommended budget. Engineering infrastructure, primarily for water, sewage, and solid waste management, is the main significant element. This graph drills into the operating side of the budget and shows us the total change by core service area. 3 core service actually see a decrease and 5 see increases. Sewage treatment shows the largest change year over year at 26%, and this primarily related to the sewer conveyance project debt. Recreation core service has increased by 14%, the cost of transportation 12.6%, and regional sustainability 11%. As we move on within the presentation, the key reasons for these changes will become evident. While each individual service has its own unique funding model, most include taxation. The graph specifically shows us the change in tax requisitions. The largest change are in regional sustainability, recreation next, and then followed by transportation. By looking to the major changes on the individual services tax requisition, an understanding of the advancement of the board's priorities, change in service levels, and the effect of federal and provincial regulations can be seen. Overall, tax requisitions have risen by $4 million. And just for clarity, I just want to point out that this excludes our sewage service and solid waste management. The next 3 slides give these details by core service. Within finance and administration core service, the overall change is just over $25,000. The cost per shareholder of North Island 911 costs have risen. The CVRD's portion is expected to be over $100,000 more than the year before. A welcome reduction to the Comox Valley Airport service. The debenture associated with this service is now complete, and therefore requisitions have decreased by over $300,000. And next, the share of cost of library services is also on the rise, and this has translated into more than $250,000 for the Comox Valley. Services included within the electoral area core service see an overall change in requisitions of $290,000. The major changes greater than 100,000 include 1 decrease and 2 increases. Building inspection service is proposed to increase by $230,000, with this being attributed to staffing and technology needs required to meet service expectations. Planning proposes an increase of 100,000 with similar associated reasons as building inspections. Denman and Hornby economic development is reduced by 185,000 as there was a one-time grant in 2023. And finally, there are smaller increases. I've grouped together the increases associated with parks and greenway services, primarily for moving forward on existing strategies. And the community facilities have noted asset management needs that's driving some increases there. The core service of regional sustainability has a net increase of just over $800,000. The board has provided direction to increase requisitions within the emergency shelter and land acquisition service, and this has amounted to a change of $652,000. Regional Parks and Trails continues to move forward with establishment of this new service and has proposed increasing the requisition by $163,000. Within the transportation core service, we have only one service, that being Transit Comox Valley. The associated increase in taxes is $590,000. Core service recreation will see requisitions increased by $1.7 million. There are 3 main reasons for this. Before moving to new service, I'd like to highlight the existing operations. Asset management needs within recreation complexes is driving a $650,000 increase. The service simply cannot afford to replace its existing assets and will need gradual tax increases across the plan. The Comox Valley Track and Field Service has included the new turf field as currently layered within the strategy, and this is what is driving most of the $793,000 increase. Recreation grants is up by $190,000, primarily due to the Courtney outdoor pool. And lastly, as an essential area, the core service of emergency programs is planned for a $630,000 increase. This is a result of multiple fire halls and apparatus needs. And I do want to note here the change in the service bylaw for emergency program, as this results in more taxation. However, with municipalities now included in the service bylaw, it is offset by a sale and service amount of almost the same value. I have added a link to the full detail on taxation assessment values on this slide for quick access if there's wonderings about any other specific changes that are out there. And finally, for this section, I'll move on to the services, which are utilities, water, sewage, and solid waste management. The CVRD has essential roles in providing these services to households in the valley. Utility rates is the primary means for funding. However, it is important to note exactly how that occurs, how it is layered within the budgets, and how this affects our households. The 300 Comox Valley system service, of course, takes care of treating water and getting it to the partners' distribution systems. A bulk water rate is used, and it is increased to $1 per cubic meter in 2024. Across multiple other water services, EASC directors have received the results of the important water rate review. Parcel taxes and utility rates have been adjusted accordingly. For sewage, the CVRD service responsible for treatment charges out based on flows, and this is for Comox and Courtney. These 2 municipalities then charge households through their utility rates. The planned increase for the sewage service is $900,000. Separately governed by the CSWM board, the solid waste service is funded by taxation and tipping fees. Tax requisitions for this service are included within the CVRD budget, and this is charged through to households within the Comox and Strathcona regional districts as a separate rate on tax notices. Tipping fees make up the secondary piece of major funding. Municipalities are charged on tipping fees, who in turn work this cost into corresponding municipal utility rates. Individual users to the landfill will pay tipping fees. The upcoming slides will provide the estimated effort per typical resident. And before we go there, just a few words about assessment values. Within the first few days of January, BC Assessment issues the 2024 roll. BC Assessment has communicated the trending as a mix of small increases and small decreases. The range change between plus and minus 5%. This chart provides the typical assessed values for the CVRD participants. Each participant has seen a small drop, and these specific assessments have been used to determine the estimations on the following charts. For each municipal partner, the estimated change per typical household is shown here. For households in Courtenay, the proposed budget has an estimated effect of $49 a year, more or $4 a month. For Comox, $69 more or $5.75 a month. In Cumberland, $26.60 more or $2.22 a month. In electoral areas, estimates are prepared as follows, and services vary across areas and some of these sub areas. Area A, Bay and Sound, is estimated to see a $105 increase or $8.78 a month. Denman Island sees a decrease of $44. For Hornby, an increase of $84 a year. Area B is estimated to see an increase of $140 a year or almost $12 a month. And Area C, almost $100 a year. The details associated down to the service level can be found on the website and through this link. It is important to note that there are other combinations as well as what is shown on this slide. And this is because the amounts above don't include the individual services, such as the fire departments, street lighting, and some other small services. The CVRD oversees 3 other related entities. Each entity provides a key service to the Valley. North Island 911 and the Regional Hospital District are separate companies with their own governing boards. 911 is experiencing a rise in operational costs, and this is primarily attributed to the requirements of next generation 911 calling. The hospital district continues with planning for additional future facilities. However, it does not expect tax requisitions to rise. Comox Strathcona Waste Management is under the direction of a separate board with authority over operations and budgets. The board received and reviewed the proposed budget earlier this month. The budget maintains tax requisitions equal to the prior year. Further detail can be found within the report considered at the January 11th, 2014 meeting of that board. And we have a link for you here on this slide. Moving on to capital. Although total capital needs reduce over the 5-year period, many significant projects remain to be addressed. The slides that follow help us to understand this. Over the course of the next 5 years, the proposed budget indicates $217 million in capital spending. The next 3 slides include major capital projects organized by core service. Some projects span across multiple years, while smaller scale projects are planned for completion over a 1-year period. 16 projects in total have been identified here. I won't go through each project. This listing is here for directors to refer back to as you make your way through the budget information that is relevant to you. In the electoral area, there are a couple of major parks projects and the work at Shingle Spit boat launch. And as I believe we are all aware, 3 fire hall builds are planned in the emergency program area. In sewage treatment, what I believe is one of the largest projects undertaken by the CVRD, all is ready to go for sewer conveyance project, and the budget shows just over $85 million in projected costs over 2024 through to 2027. There are many significant projects on this slide, including Water South Services Extension for almost $20 million and water treatment plants at both Union Bay and Graham Lake. And last but not least, in recreation, the new turf field has a projected cost of 5.7 million and is currently scheduled for 2024. I have mentioned the asset replacement needs for recreation complexes. Across the 5 years, there's $3.4 million projected. Various projects for the exhibition center amount to about $762,000. To understand the implications of these projects, directors can refer to those individual PowerPoints that James mentioned for each of the specific services. So it should be easy, hopefully, to go from what you're seeing on these slides. If you just key into the service number, which is the first thing you see on each line there, you can go and find that PowerPoint out there on the website, and I'll show you where that is at the end. I do have a final note on this slide as to not lose sight of the major capital projects being worked on by staff that are not currently included within service bylaws and therefore are not seen within this financial plan. Okay, just noted there for you on the bottom. Close attention to reserves and debt is an essential part of fiscal management. The line on this graph, which represents the ending balances for reserves, is not trending in a way that we would want. I think it is indicative of what we see in individual services, in some individual services. We have an intensive period at the moment. We've had to increase our reserves in order to get some projects done. And as we go to the future, services are finding it difficult to maintain existing reserve savings because of increased costs and of operations and debt. Through the work we will conduct within the fiscal framework, we will further analyze and understand what will be required to reach and maintain sustainable operations. And this would help us as we move to future planning cycles to adjust. As we would for our own households, the cost of debt cannot become overbearing. Debt levels reach a projected high of 156 million at the end of 2028. And of course, this is across all of our services. As many of the major capital projects are well underway during this period, debt levels will level off and start to decline during the next decade. So with that final note on reserves and debt, I just have a few quick points for you on public engagement. As I mentioned at the onset of the presentation, staff did endeavor to create a better experience for public participation into budget. The engaged site has been used, so we are able to take advantage of some greater tools out there in this site. Citizens are best directed to this area. They can learn about the process and clearly see what the key events are. There's functionality here for them to ask questions, for answers to be provided, and for them to also see what other type of questions have been asked by other citizens. As is typical, staff will inform directors of feedback provided by citizens at key points in time during budget deliberation. And at any time, directors can come back out to this site, and they can also come and see what the conversation is along the way as well. Coming up next will be meetings scheduled for February 5th, 6th, and 7th. They will be followed by a series of meetings for the committees and the commissions, which all have separate delegated authority to review budgets, and that's across February 13th. Once complete, staff will return to the March 12th meeting of the CVRD board with a recommended budget. With this being the first time dealing with budgets in this way, it's difficult to know whether enough time has been scheduled. Staff is prepared to use the meeting scheduled for the 27th of February to bring back any additional requests coming from the initial budget. And if necessary, additional meetings can be scheduled. The board must adopt the budget, of course, prior to the end of March. And currently, the bylaw readings are scheduled for March 22nd. And lastly, considering we have changed things up for directors in that in prior years cycles, the material was attached for you to the agenda. I just want to end the presentation by showing you where You can locate things on the website. For your information, also wanted to let you know that we will produce agendas for the 5th, 6th, and the 7th. In those agendas, you will find some helpful links as well. But Lisa's just going to help me to demonstrate for you what this looks like on our website. So firstly, I'll just talk about where we are all used to normally going to find our budget information. And that's the area where we go about and we go to finance, and then you see the 2024 budget, proposed budget landing spot, okay? And at that page, if we just go a little bit further down, you'll see one of the first buttons that are here. And it is about noting to the public that there is an area on Engage where you can participate. And I'll just ask Lisa to click on that. And it'll open up another tab and takes us to that Engage area. On this particular side, you'll see very big here. Please provide us with your feedback. And this is the area where they can come and actually put in their question. That will obviously get it informed as finance, and will provide responses for them. This site also gives them a nice area where they can key into the key dates and milestones along the way in the process. Okay, some further information here where they can learn more about our financial planning process. Okay, so going a little further down, and we've endeavored to build on the functionality within the website where information is being funneled through key services. So as we go down and we want to learn more about our core services, if we click on recreation and move further down, there is an area where we can open up to see the proposed budget. And Lisa can just open that up. And what's available at the onset is a little bit of an overview for the core service, which is a little bit higher there. And then the main thing I just wanted to call your attention on, because we do believe that this is the easiest way for directors and the public to get to information. We have each of the services which belong to recreation layered across the bottom there, 600, 601, etc. And when you go to this area, the first thing that's there, as James has mentioned, we do believe the PowerPoint is a very key document. And in essence, much of what you saw in your staff report, we have layered into this PowerPoint, hopefully in an easier to quicker way to digest the information. So we encourage directors and the public to come to the PowerPoint first. You want to get further into the detail of the budget, that's what the report does. So those typical type of budget reports that you normally would see are in that PDF that's there to the right of the PowerPoint. And so that's that. And just going back to the area that's normally out there for financial planning, where we have the proposed budget, if Lisa opens that. What we have here is a number of documents that can be resourceful to yourselves, resourceful to the municipalities. They've been informed that this is out here. Some comprehensive PDFs where the whole budget is sitting, and also a number of key other documents where we've included information for tax requisitions, assessment, for example, information broken down by each one of the areas, max levies, etc. Okay. So hopefully you find that nice and easy to navigate through. And if I can just go back to my presentation, just closing comments, and that'll be it for me. So thank you. This concludes my presentation today. I'm hopeful I have succeeded in meeting your needs at this point in this budget process. And I'll go to my last slide. The intent with this initial delivery of the budget is to give elected officials enough of an overview to help get an understanding of the pressure points, the risks, the implications to services, and implications to the community. Today is not the best time to be diving into some detailed questions for our services. For example, the budget deliberation dates are a better time to do that, as the other key staff will be there. in order to help address those questions. During the next 2 weeks, of course, we do encourage directors, you can send clarification questions my way. If you're not seeing something in that package that you need to know, if you send those in advance, we'll get material ready. We'll just make sure that that is available for you as we get to those deliberation meetings, and just all as an attempt to help us to get through the vast amount of services that are there for us to do. Okay. Myself and my team are also very much here to help you navigate through this, so please let me know if you need some assistance. And I just want to take a moment for a huge thank you out to our financial planning staff, Jared and Kelly, who are here with us today. The whole of the finance team, as it has taken many resources for us to get to what you see today. A very large thank you out to budget managers, the supporting staff, and EMT members. It takes a whole lot of people to be able to roll together the thousands lines of tasks in order to get this. And thank you very much for your time and attention. And as always, we look forward to the next step in making these important budget decisions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Lucy, and thanks for you and your team for all the time that went into the preparation of all these documents. I saw Director Grant's light in the room, and then we'll go to Director Arbor after that.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just wondering about the timing of the budget. I know in Comox, we had this discussion and decided to move ours up. So we would have some idea of what our budget was going to be in about October. And my thinking here is that, we've got things like the turf field, for example, and we're asked to say whether we want a turf field or not. We have no idea where the budget is going. So if we knew the budget roughly earlier, then we would know whether we want to look at those kinds of things. And so I'm just wondering how hard that is, or if it's possible. I know we can do it maybe easier at our communities, but I'm not sure if that's something we could look at for here.
Yes, through the chair. Most definitely something that we have talked about. I think we'll kind of keep considering the timing, just generally speaking, without diving real deep into that, because there is further conversation that we need to have as staff around this. There are some elements that I believe that we can deal with earlier. So we'd certainly appreciate the comments, like to take it away and come back during our next cycle to potentially consider moving some things up, for example.
And a follow-up if you want one. Great. And now we'll go to Director Arbor online.
Yeah, thanks. And not to it's interesting that was Dr. Grant's comment, and I don't disagree with him. It would be nice to have it earlier, but my comment was going to be how happy I am that it is earlier this year. And typically what happens since I've been elected anyways is, the day before we have our meetings on Monday at ESC and we get the reports on Friday night. And then when it's budget, you have community partners, you have a bunch of people. And so there was a 3-day turnaround as elected official to look at the budget, consider it, and try to imagine what other budgets might be coming down the road. I thought that's the best it could be, but I want to give huge thanks to Lucy and her team for what I consider a really major improvement in our ability to look at the big picture and also have a proper amount of time to consider these budgets. I spent a couple of hours last night already perusing through the documents and an hour on the ferry, and I've never had such a great overview and availability of information before we consider a single budget. And the second piece is I want to also thank the presentation around the overview and the context, especially in Area A, and especially in the Royston and Union Bay part of Area A. We are under intense pressure with many capital projects at a time where households, like across the country, like around the world, are under intense financial pressure. So I look forward to the next month and a half to work on this. I know there will be questions from residents, but I think this is great to me. I'm just like blown away. I think it's excellent work to put all this together. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Arbor. And Lucy, perhaps you might want to just leave your microphone on, but I don't know if you wanted to respond at all to.
First of all, thank you very much for the comments, Director Arbor, and I'll certainly share that with everybody else in the organization. We really appreciate the feedback, and please keep giving us feedback, because everything that we do to put at this table is about helping you make important decisions. So if we can tailor it more to your needs, please let us know. And one of the things that I heard, I guess the other thing I just wanted to mention that I heard last year, listening in mostly to the process last year, was that desire to have more of that comprehensive understanding of what we're undertaking. So we'll keep trying to do that for you along the way, so you have an idea of overall what types of implications that we're doing. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lucy. And we'll go to Director Brown.
Thanks. This looks really great to me, having not seen or participated in the budget process. This is really great information. I'm wondering how the comments that are put through the website end up coming to the board. Do they stay there and we go look for them, or do they come to us in some sort of feedback mechanism?
I'm sorry, I turned it off through the chair. What we do is we, as the comments are submitted, and you'll see, or may not have noticed, I think that we've put a deadline there of February 21st for people to get their comments in. We gather those comments as they come in and bring them to the board or the committees, etc. And since we've shifted the dates for our meetings, I certainly can see at the onset of our February 5th, we will put that out there at the beginning of that meeting to say this is what we've received, and so that everybody's aware, so that directors are aware as you keep walking forward to make your decisions.
All right, thanks. And Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair. Yeah, incredible work on this. I know every department is doing their part, but the finance department carries the load, and give me a 10,000 word essay any day, like the numbers. This is just overwhelming to me, but anyway, I had a question about the transportation section with the transit strike, and if you're able to speak at all about implications to the budget with the job action. I mean, we're obviously not receiving service right now. Is there anything that you can say about that?
Yeah, sure. If I can jump in there, again, Lucy mentioned it a couple of times. Those more specific questions around services and diving into them would be really best suited for when we present the budgets themselves on. I think transit will probably be on the February 5th date. That'll be the all day board session.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and we'll be able to dig in there.
All right, not seeing any further lights. Oh, no, of course, yeah, Director Hardy.
Yeah, in regards to the timelines, I think there was February the 5th, there was a CBRD meeting to go over budget. And then I saw on the 5th as well, the Electoral Area Services Committee. So just wondering if the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting is going to be entirely different from the CBRD board meeting.
I noted that also on this slide here. And February 5th is the all-day CBRD board meeting. I believe it might start at 8:30 on Monday, February 5th. February 6th will be starting with the Black Creek Oyster Bay meeting first thing in the morning. And then the Electoral Area Services Committee will start, I believe, at 10 or 10:30 on Tuesday, February 6th. And then we'll carry on with Electoral Area Services all the way through till Wednesday, February 7th. So those dates are actually, they need to be adjusted there.
So is the 7th up there?
It doesn't show it there, but it should say BCOB on the 6th and EASC on the 6th and 7th. Yeah, we'll correct that slide.
Lucy, did you want to, you got your light on to comment on that? Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Thank you, Director Hardy, for noticing that. We'll fix it. This presentation will get posted out on the website as well, in case it's useful to citizens and for yourselves. So we'll just make sure that's correct. Thanks.
You want to follow?
Yeah, I had one more question in regards to the slide on the turf field. And again, just recognizing the fact that during the recreation, and I don't know if we want to dive into it all that much right now, but based upon the conversation we had today was with regards to the maintenance or the new turf field that was going to occur in 2029. But based upon the slide presentation we saw here, it made mention of a new turf being put in place and that there was a budget of about $780,000. And based upon the presentation that we received earlier for the Rec Commission, it made mention of the fact that we're looking at about $1 million to replace that turf in 2029. So, and half of that cost is going to be covered by the school district. So I was just kind of wanting to get some clarity, and maybe it happens later on. But based upon this slide and the slide that we saw in the Recreation Committee, I just want to make sure if those two were in alignment or not. Thanks.
I think maybe for the moment, what I'll just do is just make sure there's clarity over what's on this slide. So what I'm highlighting here, and of course, this is just pieces of the capital budget that I've brought forward, highlighting the fact that we do have the new turf field is layered in this budget just as it sits right now, aligned with the strategy there for 2024. And what you're seeing, and that's it. So there are, for sure, going to the future, there are other capital projects that are associated with the new turf field. I've not highlighted them here.
So sorry again, just for clarity purposes, and maybe I'll just ask one more comment and then I'll leave it alone. But again, just trying to understand, I think there was a slide earlier with regards to the budget for replacement of the existing turf. And there was a budget of 780,000. There we go, 790,000 for new artificial turf. Based upon the slide that we saw earlier this afternoon for the Recreation Commission, it was anticipated that that new turf field would go in 2029. So if we're looking at this budget from 24, and what we were told in that presentation was it was going to cost approximately $1 million. Half is going to be funded by the CVRD and half is going to be funded by the school district. So that's the clarity part that I was trying to get back to. And
Sure, I think I can try to provide clarity. So I think we're talking about two different fields here. The artificial turf presented here would be that new turf proposed for what's currently the upper portion of Vanier down below the school, not where the current artificial turf is. And I think your question during the Recreation Commission meeting was around what's the lifespan of the current artificial turf, which is below the sports center. And that was an answer where in about 2029, we would have to be replacing the turf bits and pieces in that field. So I think that's the distinction there.
You have your light on. Did you want to add anything further to that?
I don't, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Well, it's been a good discussion. I don't see any further lights on, and this is just simply for receipt today. So any opposed to receipt? And that passes unanimously, and we'll move on to the next item, which is the BC Emergency Management legislation. This is a staff. Thank you. And second, and so it's a report on updates, and I'll pass that over to staff.
Thank you very much. Carrie McIntyre, our emergency planning coordinator, will be introducing this staff report on the updates to emergency management legislation. So Carrie, over to you.
Thank you. So the report that you have in front of you, the purpose of that report is to highlight some of the key changes in the new Emergency and Disaster Management Act and the proposed regulations for local authorities linked to the 4 phases of emergency management, which are preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery, and specifically around 3 areas. That is co-development of planning and operational frameworks for multi-jurisdictional emergency management organizations. There's a comprehensive approach to emergency planning and risk assessment requirements that support equity, the inclusion of Indigenous and local knowledge, and reflect climate-driven emergencies. and the legislated requirement under DRIPA, or the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, and this new act, the Emergency and Disaster Management Act, to consult, coordinate, and cooperate with Indigenous governing bodies in all 4 phases of emergency management. So included in this report is a summarized response to the Ministry of Emergency and Climate, Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness regulations for local authorities. They put out a discussion paper, and that's Appendix A. The feedback paper, which is Appendix B, provides responses to those 14 questions, informing regulations related to consultation, collaboration, and cooperation, emergency plans and risk management, risk assessments, business continuity plans, and the formation of multi-jurisdictional emergency management organizations. And this feedback paper was prepared collaboratively by the Comox Valley Emergency Management Service staff, with a working group made up of emergency management service members and partners in key operational roles from the City of Courtenay, the town of Comox, the Village of Cumberland, Comox First Nation, and mutual aid partners from the City of Campbell River, Island Health, and Health Emergency Management BC. This staff report also provides an overview of key changes to the emergency management legislation around states of local emergency and powers, expanded evacuation supports, local government claims adjudication and funding gaps, as well as compliance and enforcement. And the Comox Valley Emergency Management staff anticipate coordinating similar working groups in the future to co-develop feedback on future proposed regulations related to these changes, specifically where the new act reflects a comprehensive pivot towards disaster risk reduction and an alignment with climate adaptation. Also, in cases where the act may supersede existing regulations and legislations, for example, related to real estate, land use planning, building codes, critical infrastructure, housing, social development, and transportation. So to help inform these changes, we ask that the board receive these regulations on local authorities' feedback so that these may be submitted to the province by the January 31st deadline for this year. We also ask that the CVRD support staff to work with our emergency management partners to submit a joint letter to the Premier and Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, requesting the creation of local government emergency management operational working groups to collaborate in the development of future proposed regulations under this act. And lastly, I will add that the next 2 reports on the agenda, which are number 6 and 7, directly relate to the engagement, implementation, and funding supports required to operationally inform and collectively adapt these new legislative and regulatory changes mentioned in this report. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Carrie. Just waiting to see if there are any comments, Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for all the work that's gone into this. I think it's notable that several times when the question is asked, do we need rules? The answer is no, we need money. And that rings through loud and clear. And I think that the reality is that we're really realizing as life becomes more complex in all of these areas, it takes resources, and we can no longer have these sorts of important things done off the side of people's desks in a piecemeal manner. And I really hope that the province recognizes that. So thanks for your efforts in that regard.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you, Carrie. I don't see any further lights, so we have a motion for receipt on the table. So all those, sorry, anyone opposed? Okay, that passes, and there's a recommendation. Okay, that's being moved and seconded, and that's the feedback be on regulations be sent to the province of BC, and further that we submit a joint letter, which is described in that second paragraph. So it's been moved and seconded. Anyone opposed? And that passes unanimously. And we'll move on to the next item, which is a report on the Indigenous Engagement Requirements Funding Program. And I'll pass that over to staff. Thank you. Seconds.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And just building on what Carrie was saying in the previous report, report 6 and 7 on this agenda fall out from that updated legislation and regulations. And this one in particular, this report in particular speaks to some grant funding that has been provided, I think rather unbeknownst to local government. And it is around the Indigenous Engagement Requirements Funding Program. So this is funding to help, as Carrie said, to implement some of that legislation. The recommendation that staff have put forward is that we work with the Comox Valley partners to pool some of that funding and work towards a more collaborative approach to develop and facilitate engagement activities. Howie Siemens is here to help with any answers that we may have to provide, but it's a fairly straightforward report, I believe. So, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, James. Not seeing, okay, Director Hardy.
So is this funding through the province?
Yes, it is.
So, sorry, Mr. Chair, through you to the CEO, I'm just wondering if there's federal funding as well available that the CVRD could work with Comox First Nation.
I could turn the microphone over to Howie if you have anything specific to add. I think this report is really about that provincial pot of funding and focusing on that. But Howie, if there's other.
Yeah, through the chair director. Yeah, this is a provincial funding that is going to be available to First Nations communities. It is the guideline is to really work with the requirement of the Emergency Act that Carrie was talking about, is they work with Indigenous governing bodies. So they will have an opportunity to have funding as well.
Great.
So again, just wanting to know if there's maybe some funding pots through federal agencies that the CVRD could work on in regards to this particular project. Like leverage those funds from the province and try to get something from Canada as well.
Through the chair, often in BC, the funding is offered through the province because there's a tripartite agreement in place with the federal government and with Indigenous Services Canada. And I think the First Nations Leadership Council, among others, to fund all nations and local authorities provincially. I think we're the only province in Canada that does that.
Thanks very much. So there's a motion for receipt on the table. We can just dispense with that. Anyone opposed? And there is a recommendation of someone. Moved and seconded. That's regarding pooling funds and the use of those. Any questions on that? Not seeing any. Anyone opposed? Great, that passes unanimously. And now we are on to item 7, DBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund applications. And motion for receipt, please. Okay, moved and seconded, and I'll pass that to staff.
Thanks very much. And again, Carrie and Howie are both here to help in that discussion if needed. I think this is a report that you would have seen a year ago, and it is a follow-up funding application through the programs noted in the staff report. We were successful in 2023 in receiving funding, and it certainly assists in delivering the services that you see through the emergency management program. So if there's any questions, by all means, we can try to answer that. But again, I think this one is fairly straightforward and has been supported before.
Seeing no questions, then we've got proceed on the table. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, and we have 2 recommendations.
Sure.
Moved and seconded, and that's the regional application be approved.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if I could suggest, I believe actually that number 1 and 2 should both have the and further that included. We would propose that the RD manage the funding.
So the same and further that we see in recommendation 2 would also apply to recommendation 1.
Yes, please.
Okay, so everyone's clear on that. Okay, good. And with that clarification, anyone opposed to recommendation 1? And that passes. Recommendation 2. Okay, any commentary on 2? Seeing none, anyone opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thanks very much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And we'll move on to, for receipt, the ICF Corridor Planning Exercise Work Plan. Moved and seconded, and I'll pass it on to staff. James?
Thanks very much. And Jake Martins, General Manager of Corporate Services, will introduce this report and work plan on the Island Rail Corridor program. Jake.
Excuse me. Thank you, James, and through the chair. Yes, staff are before you here to present a proposed work plan for the board's consideration related to the Island Rail Corridor planning exercise. The exercise admittedly has a very broad objective of creating a shared vision for the corridor that's both common within the CVRD and with Comox First Nations and our member municipalities, as well as regional districts and First Nations all along the corridor down to the southern part of the island. We've outlined in the staff report a few of the key considerations and influences that have helped provide for this work plan. I want to summarize them quickly just because given their significance and the implications for this process. The first is the troubling history of the corridor in respect of Indigenous peoples and the clear need to not repeat the wrongs of the past. And so a reconciliation-based approach has been identified and it's been clearly and strongly supported by both federal and provincial ministers and all the parties through this process. And so this aligns directly with our strategic driver, but we want to make it clear right at the start that this is a guiding feature, of course, for this important work. The second, and maybe if I could be quite candid about it, is the perpetual debate that's been going on for many years around rail versus trail. And there's very strong opinions, of course, on both sides of this. There's been considerable study by both around both uses, both making strong arguments and cases for the benefits that can be achieved and for the impact that it'll have on our region and the whole island. We're proposing to you through this process that we look at achieving a vision, or we look to establish a vision in which we can achieve all of our shared interests and not structure it solely around the feasibility of which use should go forward and which one should not. So we want to look at the Island Rail Corridor, but we also want to look at the adjacent corridors that are clearly in the neighborhood and nearby that might be able to support some of our interests and uses. Should rail be an interest that we identify in it shared, and should trails also be an interest? There's also many other interests that we can also look at, though. And so that's the last point here, is we want to consider what is those full suite of other maybe less obvious, but maybe interests and benefits that we might be able to achieve through this corridor. Things such as housing or utilities or even parks come to mind. So we want to have an open mind to what are the possibilities and consider all of those potential benefits. The attached work plan outlines 6 steps broadly speaking, but I can kind of just summarize here that we're looking at steps 1 and 2 to really prepare a thorough baseline, a technical analysis that will include the requirements and characteristics of the different uses. And then that will support step 3, which is really developing those options to understand what are the activities and what can the corridor support. And so we can consider then those competing interests where we may need to look to other corridors to potentially to accommodate certain uses or activities. And the final step 4 and 5 are providing for the development of a framework and strategy that will include both a public-facing document as well as a technical document that can hopefully help us as we move forward with it. There is step 6 in this, which is around informing the community. And it sort of ties into my final points around this presentation, which is a few things we want to highlight for the board in this proposal. The first, of course, as I mentioned at the top, is around that continual engagement with Comox First Nation throughout this process. And we also have at a few key junctures engagement with our member municipalities and with our stakeholders that are clearly in the community and have strong interests around this corridor. The second is I would like to note just around the Comox Valley Cycling Coalition and their delegation that was received at the last meeting. James at the start noted that we'd be providing a bit of commentary on that. And so we want to be transparent about what are the elements that they've requested that are incorporated in this work plan and what do we perhaps not suggest is included. The 4, as you recall, requests that the Cycling Coalition made was the first is a process for the discontinuation of rail. The second was guidelines for constructing trails on the rail bed itself. The third was the conversion of the rail bridges for use for trail purposes. And then the last was the feasibility of utilities being placed in the corridor. This is the initial proposal that we're making to you, so we appreciate there may be additions or extensions to this in which we look to undertake further work. But really, number 4, that feasibility of placing utilities, should that be a use that is shared, a shared interest of the parties, we would look to include that in this work. but not immediately would we suggest that we'd be looking to understand the process for discontinuation of rail, because if it is a shared interest of ours, then we don't see value in necessarily undertaking that work right now. If it's not identified, then that's something we would want to understand and look to action. So with that, Mr. Chair, hopefully that provides the board with a bit of an insight into this work plan, and we're pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks for running through that, Jake, and just taking a look around the room to see if I see any lights, and I'll start off with Director Hillian. Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Two questions. The first, could you re-clarify when you talk about determining if it's a shared interest, who are the parties that need to share it?
Thank you. So this would be primarily, we can speak regionally within the Comox Valley Regional District of us and our member municipalities, as well as Comox First Nation. And then we can speak even broader to the entire corridor around working with what are the shared interests of the other regional districts and the other First Nations that are also this corridor crosses through. So a bit of two different lenses, I suppose.
Okay, but when you talk about us, are you talking about us around this board table? So is it envisioned that at some point there might be some type of a vote here about rail versus trail or both or whatever?
Through the chair. So yeah, whether it's a vote, but we'll be looking to certainly engage the board around what are our interests for this corridor, and then likewise working with Comox First Nation and engaging with our member municipalities as well as part of our formulation of what are our interests to find hopefully that common ground.
Okay, thanks. And then the other question is related to existing arrangements that, for example, the city of Courtenay has a relationship with Island Rail in relation to the Island Corridor lands at Menzies and Fifth, and as a lease arrangement where that would provide access to the McPhee Meadows development. Are those existing arrangements considered in this plan?
Yes, through the chair, precisely through certainly through steps 1 and 2, where we are looking at all of the existing background studies and the existing encumbrances that are on the rail line, and then certainly appreciating that part of that process will be getting feedback from Courtenay in this instance around what the interests are, what maybe existing arrangements are.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Director Hillian, and I'll take it to Director McCollum.
Thank you, Chair. I was waiting to see if Director Arbor was going to put his hand up, because I am curious to hear about how ICF is fitting into this process, and just getting a bit of perspective on how Director Arbor sees this process moving ahead. So maybe he'll want to speak after. I guess in reading this, I am left with the impression that we're going to put some energy and some resources into more consultation, but it's a contentious issue with a lot of people on two sides of this with differing point of views, and I'm concerned that we're not necessarily moving this discussion in a way that will necessarily help us make any kind of decision. And that's not just looking at this piece of the puzzle, but how this is all going to connect when all the various partners in the regional districts and the First Nations, who all have funding to be a part of this consultation, are going to come together. Like I think that it was my concern when we first entered into the contract that we need some leadership beyond our region, and I'm not seeing that, and that's in no way a criticism to the staff here that are working on this, but I'm still not clear on how we're really going to get to an end result where we make a decision and move forward. I do have a little bit of concern around just the work, like the way it's laid out. It does clarify that the work plan provides a thorough background and a technical review, which I think is great. But I don't, and I think to a degree it's intentional. There's no financial or legal analysis. And to me, if we're not looking at all the real world constraints around this issue, I don't really see how we can ask, any of the stakeholders, what are your interests in it? Because if we're not looking at financial considerations and it's just, what sounds the best without getting into the detail. The devil is always in the details. So I do have concern around that, and I maybe I'd just like to hear how we can really get valuable information out of this without looking at legal or financial constraints.
If you want to handle that, and then we'll go to Director Arbor in a minute, but there's another light in the room first. But if you want to handle that, Jake.
I can provide a couple of comments, and by all means, James, if you want to jump in. So I'm not sure.
Sorry, Jake, before you jump in, and by all means, yeah, I think the one thing that maybe isn't or could be expanded on is the role of the working groups through the Island Rail Corridor work planning, and the working groups being I believe Capital and Cowichan and up into Nanaimo, and then from Alberni back out to Nanaimo, and then from Qualicum north to here. These working groups, and the province is heavily invested in that. They are providing that leadership. Island Corridor Foundation has asked to be a part of those conversations. The CVRD board supported some funding to the Island Corridor Foundation a month ago.
Right. Yeah.
And so there is that that kind of oversight and your words leadership around that approach. So I think that maybe is an important piece to keep in mind as we think about the work plan that we are presenting here to you. So I think everybody kind of recognizes there's a struggle to get to whatever that endpoint is, but going through this exercise of defining the background to understand what is at play, and taking a look at what some of those different options might be without ruling any in or out in particular, will help to create a bit better of a vision to how we could get to an endpoint and a decision. But it's a process to get there. And I think through the working groups, through this particular work plan, each of the other regional districts, we have some awareness of their individual exercises and efforts. And so I think they will come together, but it's a long corridor. It's a long path ahead. And this is our approach to how we would see this regional district being involved. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that on the working groups, but Jake, if there was more maybe on second piece of Director McCollum's question.
Yeah, just in respect to the financial and legal question, I think certainly there are ongoing collaboration with the other working groups on what are the legal questions that they're identifying, given that we're all members of the Island Corridor Foundation. Island Corridor Foundation has been a very active participant in this as well, and very cooperative. So we feel we've got the right pieces. We've also got the resources necessary in order to answer some of those questions. But of course, our intent is to go through this visioning exercise, and so to this point, there's been no clear signal from the province around what level of funding, or from the federal government that they'd be willing to provide to some sort of rail. So it's difficult to say that it's absolutely not feasible or that it cannot happen because of the financial limitations or barriers that are present there. So yeah, I think Director Arbor had his hand up. I'd certainly welcome his comments around the ICF perspective, because they, far more than us, are the experts on the use and the long-standing history of the corridor and the rail use.
Jake, I see Director Arbor's hand is down, but we'll go to Director Hart and take it from there.
Thanks. Just a little bit more of a follow-up from Director McCollum's comment in regards to the financial and the legal perspectives of things. I'd really be curious as to the ownership of the corridor at the end of the day. Is it revert back to the Comox First Nation based upon a rail line not being put in? Those are questions that I would like to see some clarity on down the road. Thanks.
Jake or CAO, did you want to respond to that?
I think, yeah, I mean, that is certainly part of the first part of the exercise is to get definition in that. When the talk of reversion and reversion of the rail corridor comes up, that is of course tied to recent court decisions and the reversion of those pieces of the corridor that would return to the nations through which the corridor passes the reserves and reserve lands. And so from a reversion perspective, there's no reserve lands with Comox that would be bisecting or adjacent to the corridor. But those other considerations are certainly all part of that ongoing dialogue with Comox to understand what Comox's perspective is, and then what the regional district can consider moving forward.
Thanks, James. And Jake, do you want to add anything to that, or is that?
Nope, thanks.
Okay, perfect. All right, and Director Arbor, thanks for your patience.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we have to be realistic for the foreseeable future. I know the Island Corridor has been for 10 years a stranded asset, and I think it's going to continue to be so for the foreseeable future until we arrive at, especially on the reconciliation front, until we arrive at greater consensus and clarity. So, and that's both at the full level of the corridor and also at the local level. And I think to Director Hardy, I think it is part of the Comox First Nations work plan to investigate some of those historical issues. And though, as our CEO said, reversion, as we describe it today, is tends to refer to reserve lands. It doesn't mean that we can't take a deeper dive into the full history and try to understand what has happened and what should happen. And we hear that from First Nations up and down the island. So so no discussions are off the table. I would point out, if the board is comfortable with that, we now have, in our little working group, we both have staff and elected officials with Comox First Nation and our board represented. We had a meeting last week. And just so for your interest, and if you need more regular reporting, we can probably do that. But for your interest, some of the things so Councillor McKay has been playing the role for Comox First Nation, and some of the topics she raised last week was, that she's really excited to look at the future of the corridor in the context of the regional growth strategy and otherwise. Like she was really digging in and raising great questions, which helped us, I think, which helped Jake create the plan that is being proposed today. And those conversations are happening up and down the island, of people trying to understand how we can both achieve reconciliation goals and also realize some of the value of the corridor. The answer could be neither rail nor trail. I don't know. I think it's to go into this, as Jake said, with an open mind and to look at the analysis of the values that are presented and try to arrive at a common vision, starting, as Jake said, with the federal minister and the provincial minister saying, reconciliation is at the top, and we won't arrive at some of those answers until we explore them in collaboration with the nations.
Thanks, Director Arbor. And I saw light on, sir. Okay. All right. Seeing no further discussion, then we're on receipt at this point. So anyone opposed to receipt? Okay, and I'll take a motion for the recommendation. And that's that the work plan for the Island Rail Corridor planning exercise as outlined in the staff report be approved. All those in favor? Just mixing it up by not asking who's opposed. Okay, thanks very much, and that passes. Oh, sorry, and I apologize. I thought I saw all hands go up. Was anyone opposed there? Yeah. Maybe they did. Yeah, good reminder. Thanks. And we're on to bylaws and resolutions, and the first one is third reading, and this is following the January 16th public hearing regarding Forbidden Plateau. Could I get that moved? Oh, and someone second it? Second, great. And this is a vote of the areas only. All those in favor? And any opposed? Director Grieve is. Sorry? Yep. All right, and next we have for adoption, the Comox Valley Regional District Parkland Development Cost Charges Bylaw number 238. That's also for the areas. It's being moved, it's been seconded. All those in favor? And that passes. And then we'll be moving on to new business. We're getting near the end of this agenda. And I guess I'll take this one. This is regarding a letter from me. The letter contains two resolutions. They're both regarding important aspects of housing, to different portions of that spectrum of needs. One is about support for local governments that are exploring entities such as housing authorities and requesting support from the province on that. And the second, well, we can go into in a second, regards the emergency weather response shelters. So I'll see if anyone wants to move requested action number 1. Yeah. Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you very much. And I should just say that in the creation of these two resolutions, I really appreciate feedback on my drafts from staff and from Mayor Brown, Mayor Wells, Mayor Minions, and the leadership team of the coalition, as well as the executive director. It was a lot of useful feedback that hopefully crafted resolutions which will find support to ABICC. So I'm open to a motion for requested action number 2. The second. Okay, moved and seconded, and I'm not going to read it because it's a long one, but not seeing any. Oh, sorry, Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to acknowledge my appreciation that this resolution has come forward. We've just come through a period where we had the emergency weather response, and I think I'm not alone in having received a lot of questions from people who didn't understand why the response came to an end when it did. We also experienced a fair amount of confusion among not only citizens of the community who were witnesses to the process, but those who actually were using the service around when it was going to happen and where it was going to be. And everyone around the table here knows about the struggles that we had to try and actually identify a location. So this resolution to me speaks to many of those challenges where we're kind of left scrambling at the last minute to put something together that should in fact be planned and properly resourced much further in advance. And I think it's appropriate that we look to the province for leadership in that regard. And I really appreciate that that's what this resolution sets out to do. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Hillian. And this resolution will be going to, with the support of the 3 mayors in the Comox Valley, to all 3 council tables. And we look forward to, one hopes, it passing at all 4. And I think a united Comox Valley has been a very successful force when we go to talk to the province. And I'd love to see us go walk into ABICC united with four endorsements of both these resolutions. So but I see Director Arbor. Do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, thanks. I hadn't seen this until the agenda was published, so I would channel my Edwin Grieve and say they are 3 reps that represent 25,000 people in the valley, and we remain supportive of the efforts, whether we're part of crafting this or not. In terms of I can't help but think that I've been monitoring the comments, the public comments and the letters to the editor and the rest of it. And I mean, it's interesting that in 2011, the CVRD had purchased land for an emergency shelter in Courtney. And the opposition was so great at the time from the business communities and others that that land was sold. And so, and then with no purchase of other land. And gosh, it does feel like we're a little bit behind the efforts of other communities in nearby regions. Not all, but I'm really hopeful that a combination of funding. We're doing budget this year. I think it's good to ask the province for more, but I think there's a lot that we can do with the resources we have. We have choices to make. If we wanted to drop $1 million or $2 million on an emergency shelter as a region, I think we could do it. So I'll say that we shouldn't stop looking at our own budgets and see how we can do more with what we have, in addition to lobbying the province for more resources. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Arbor, and a good observation. I was remiss in perhaps not also consulting each of the area directors. It was an effort to try and get input, but appreciate your comment. I'll make sure that happens in future. And I see a comment from Director Morin.
Thanks, Chair. This is just a general comment around the ABICC resolutions. Obviously, I guess it was UPCM where we were really successful last year in putting forth as a community many resolutions and them getting a lot of support. And I think they all passed. Can't remember, I'm pretty sure. But I just think for the delegates who go to ABICC and UBCM, it's really important to for us to have some statements ready in case there was one resolution, I believe, that many of us supported last year that didn't pass, that actually would have had a big impact on some of the things that we're dealing with here, because, people hadn't made a coordinated effort to kind of make sure that the people were in the room and people were speaking to the resolution. So I think when we're submitting resolutions, it's great, but I also think we should have some conversations around making sure there's someone up at the mic and making sure everyone's in the room. If we go to all this work and we work with staff and all those partners that you talked about to put forward a really good resolution, I think it's important to also go the extra mile to make sure that we put the other work behind it to make sure that they get passed. Thanks.
Those are good words of advice on bringing resolutions forward and making sure they're successful on the floor. Thank you. And Director Hellion.
Thanks, Chair. I want to briefly respond to Director Arbor's comment. The building that was going to be erected in 2011 was rejected by the council of the day for the exact reasons that we are currently getting pilloried left, right, and center for the Connect Center in town. They didn't want that type of ambiance with shopping carts and people who were homeless on the streets that close to the downtown business area. We have that now, but of course we don't have the proper facility to go with it. We're using a temporary building that's totally inadequate for the purpose. And every day we get mail and correspondence from people who have serious concerns. And of course, we also get concerns from the agencies that are working there about, and the people who provide the service about the inadequacy. So we're basically getting killed on both sides. We do remain with a strong belief that we are going to get an announcement from BC Housing that will result in a permanent and purpose-built shelter being built. Which doesn't mean that the CVRD won't have a contribution to make at some point to solving this major problem. But we're holding out to have something definite by the end of March. And we really wish that we could provide more details. But if we told you, we would probably have to kill you. So that's an old saying that I've never used at this table. I apologize if anybody takes offense at that. Anyway, it's a bit of an irony that here we are 13 years later with exactly the problem that the Courtenay Council shot down in flames back then. But I totally agree with you that we're so far behind in solving this problem. And it really is disgraceful in such a wealthy country as this that we have this extreme poverty and degradation on our streets and we can't solve it. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Helene. And with those stirring words, I see no further lights on. And so the resolution is on the table. So all those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, and that passes unanimously. And I think we're just down to termination at this point. Okay, anyone opposed? Seeing none. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good night.